Welcome to this explainer. Imagine, just for a second, trying to get the entire world to agree on a single set of moral rules. Sounds completely impossible, right? Well, today, we're exploring a fascinating ancient framework that attempted to do exactly that. Establish a universal baseline for human morality. We're unpacking the 7 Laws of Noah. Okay, let's dive right in. Back in 1991, the United States Congress actually passed Public Law 102-14. It was a joint resolution honoring what it called the historical tradition of ethical values and principles which are the basis of civilized society. But here's the wild part. The resolution explicitly names these values as the 7 Noahide laws. So how on earth did a concept rooted in classical rabbinic Judaism find its way straight into the U.S. congressional record?
To figure out how this ancient code ended up in modern politics, we'll start with the ancient universal code, decode the 7 commandments themselves, compare them through reason, revelation, and parallels, look at the modern Noahide movement, and finally tackle the controversies and the future.
Section 1. In Ancient Universal Code, Genesis and the Talmud's Framework for Humanity.
The history of this concept brilliantly illustrates the incredibly long journey of these laws. Our story starts way back in biblical antiquity, specifically Genesis chapter 9. After the flood, God establishes a covenant with Noah and his descendants, which, if you think about it, literally means all of humanity. It's a universal covenant sealed with the sign of the rainbow. Fast forward to the 5th century, and the Babylonian Talmud, in Tractate Sanhedrin, derives and explicitly lists out 7 specific precepts from that story. Then, jumping to the 12th century, the great philosopher Maimonides codified these laws in his massive work, the Mishneh Torah, giving them a formal legal structure. And that incredibly long historical thread brings us all the way to 1991, when they were officially recognized by U.S. Public Law 102-14. Section 2. The 7 Commandments. Decoding the minimal moral baseline. Before we get into the actual rules, we really need to define the term Shiva Mitzvot Pnei Noach, which translates to the 7 Laws of Noah. Now, in classical Jewish thought, Jews are obligated to observe a massive 613 commandments. But the Noahide laws act like a conceptual bridge between that highly specific Jewish law and universal ethics. They're addressed to non-Jews, meaning they are particular in their origin, but entirely universal in their intended scope. So what are the actual commandments? Well, 6 of them are prohibitions, and 1 is a positive obligation. They cover those obvious foundational societal rules we'd expect, like prohibiting murder, theft, and sexual immorality. But they also set theological boundaries, like prohibiting idolatry and blasphemy. And critically, the final rule is the obligation to establish courts of justice, meaning a society absolutely must have an institutionalized legal system to enforce these norms. It is essentially an ancient blueprint for the rule of law.
Now, what's totally unexpected here is the 6th law, the prohibition of eating flesh torn from a living animal. In a framework that mostly deals with human interactions and theology, this is a very distinct mandate governing animal welfare. It derives directly from Genesis 9:4 and strictly forbids gratuitous cruelty to animals. Interestingly enough, Kabbalistic and mystical traditions actually saw this as a way to rectify the primal violence and chaos that caused the biblical flood in the first place. And today, modern expositors often connect this directly to ecological ethics and environmental stewardship.
Section 3. Reason, Revelation, Parallels. Comparing universal ethical frameworks. When we compare Noahide law with Christian natural law, we hit a really fascinating tension. On one side, Christian natural law is often framed as a moral order that we can figure out by human reason alone. It just makes sense, right? But on the other side, Noahide law, especially as Maimonides explained it, insists that while these laws are accessible to human reason, their ultimate authority actually comes from divine revelation at Mount Sinai. So a person who follows them just because they make logical sense is considered wise, but someone who follows them because they were divinely commanded through Moses is deemed a pious among the nations. It's a really deep, ancient debate between reason and revelation.
Similarly, Islamic jurisprudence offers an amazing parallel framework. Classical Islamic fiqh outlines the protection of 5 basic goods: religion, life, intellect, lineage, and property. And honestly, this aligns remarkably well with the Noahide prohibitions on murder, theft, and sexual misconduct. The main structural difference is that Islamic law typically envisions regulating a multi-religious society under Muslim governance, whereas Noahide law is envisioned in Jewish sources as a standard to be realized under literally any political regime. Still, it's a beautiful example of how Abrahamic traditions balance their specific theology with universal moral claims.
Section 4. The modern Noahide movement. Non-Jews adopting the 7 laws today.
Now, for centuries, this was mostly just a theoretical discussion among rabbis, high-level academic debates. But in the late 20th century, a distinct, highly self-conscious modern Noahide movement emerged. This was largely propelled by Orthodox Jewish outreach campaigns, most notably championed by the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Menahem Mendel Schneerson. He actively encouraged his followers to get the word out about the Noahide laws to non-Jews. The goal was to promote a universal moral baseline and, in some theological views, to actually help prepare the world for the Messianic era.
And today, there are thriving communities of Bnei Noach, or children of Noach, all around the world. Demographically speaking, they're often former Christians or secular seekers drawn to Jewish ethical monotheism, but who don't necessarily want to fully convert to Judaism. Their daily practices include prayer, studying the Torah texts relevant to Noahides, and strict observance of those 7 laws. To support them, organizations like Ask Noah International have popped up, providing rabbinic guidance, legal codes, and a really powerful sense of community.
Section 5. Controversies and the future. Debates, tensions, and eschatological visions.
So when the United States passed that 1991 resolution we talked about at the very beginning, it definitely didn't go unnoticed. Some critics argued that recognizing these laws in public spheres risks blurring the line between church and state. Because the laws explicitly prohibit blasphemy and idolatry, secular critics worry about tangling up religious norms with civil law. And honestly, this political recognition has unfortunately sparked some pretty wild fringe conspiracy theories, with some falsely claiming it's a secret plot to impose Talmudic law and execute non-compliant citizens.
In response to these debates and those fringe theories, Noahide organizations forcefully maintain a completely different reality. They note that the code is strictly about voluntary ethical self-governance and moral education. It is absolutely not a blueprint for theocratic domination. But this back and forth perfectly illustrates the massive challenge democracies face when trying to introduce religiously articulated concepts into pluralistic public politics.
Furthermore, these controversies aren't just external. There are huge debates within Judaism itself. Scholars argue over the fundamental nature of the Noahide laws. On one hand, it's seen as a beautifully inclusive path. It affirms that anyone from any background can be considered righteous among the nations and achieve a share in the world to come simply by being a moral person. No conversion required. But on the other hand, critics ask if this system unintentionally sets up a moral hierarchy. Think about it. In a modern world striving for absolute egalitarianism, if Jews have 613 commandments and Gentiles only have 7, does that encode a structural asymmetry into the moral universe? It's a complex tension between inclusivism and hierarchy that theologians are still actively navigating today.
Which brings us to our final thought for you to ponder. Can any universal moral code ever truly be untethered from the specific religious traditions that birthed it? The 7 Laws of Noah offer a brilliant, ancient attempt to find the absolute ethical baseline for all of humanity. But as we've seen, those laws carry the distinct fingerprints of their biblical and Talmudic origins. Can we agree on the rules of society without agreeing on where they came from? It's a profound question about the future of global ethics, and the 7 Laws of Noah provide one of the most fascinating test cases in human history.